Welcome back to Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. Last time, Elincia's gambit was a success, with the help of a gambit from Bastion and the Greil Mercenaries. As they say, to deceive your enemies, you must first deceive your friends. Speaking of the Greil Mercenaries now, this is their story, and it's going to be their story for quite a while. Now it's time to begin Part 3, the longest part in this game. I said before, it's as long as Parts 1 and 2 combined. But it's where things really escalate in terms of the overall conflict, and it's where things start really getting epic in my opinion. Let's go.
Three years ago, Crimea freed itself from Daean tyranny. Its nobles used that freedom to berate the queen and scrabble for power. Disgusted with their greed and arrogance, Ike and the Greil Mercenaries left the court behind and returned to work. Thanks to their efforts and to Queen Elincia's even-handed rule, Crimea has avoided a bloody civil war. Before departing the capital once again, Ike receives disquieting news from Queen Elincia. The Black Knight, the man who murdered Ike's father, has once again been seen in Daean. The Queen's words hang heavy over Ike as he leads the mercenary group back to their headquarters.
Yeah, this is the very same place that we were back in Path of Radiance. It's not quite the same models, but it's just an updated version of the GameCube models. And that's exactly why Ike gave up his noble title, and also why an Ike and Elincia pairing couldn't happen. This feels like we're going back to the early days of Path of Radiance, where the Greil Mercenaries are just simple mercenaries, but they still want something more. It is nice to be needed by royalty. And yeah, so something interesting about this is that in the extended script there's a lot less blatant exposition here. A lot of this is mostly recaps for the sake of people who didn't play Path of Radiance. You know, like, remember when you did this and that caused all of our hardships currently? I'm pretty sure Miss wouldn't enjoy that very much. And yeah, this is also more exposition, explaining that Ike inherited the mercenary company from his father. But now we're finally into new territory. Ranulf gets a little bit of an expanded role in this scene in the extended script, although Ranulf is going to be very important in this part overall, so he gets a lot more lines in the extended script. In Path of Radiance, Ranulf wasn't really all that important. He appeared a few times, but he got a massively expanded role in Radiant Dawn. He's practically the secondary protagonist of Part 3, for reasons that you'll find out very soon. And unlike Bednion, Gallia didn't abuse the fact they aided you afterwards. Yeah, Gallia could have easily been invaded by Daean if we hadn't done something about them. That was Ashnard's next step, and that would have started a war between all the countries. So there's a little bit of extra expansion on this plot point in the extended script. They mention how Leanne was also babbling a lot of things in ancient tongue, and Ranulf says, okay, it's a good thing not many people understand that, because if they did, that would be leaking of major military secrets. And then he explains this. Wait a minute, you got Kilvas on your side? Something tells me that's not going to end well for you. Nasalis seems to be reformed since the last game, though. Keyword seems. And yeah, I like that line. That escalated quickly is a very good way to describe what this is. So why is everyone going to war? Turns out, remember how at the end of part 1, Raphael said there was something that he needed to do in Gallia? And then early in part 2, Leanne said it's imperative that she saw Sir Ike as soon as possible? This is what that was leading up to. We all know how much Tivan resents Bednion for their part in the Heron slaughter, and now that he has definitive proof,
Raphael, eldest prince of the Heron clan, returns in the company of the Wolf Queen, Nyla, and the mage, Tormod, to tell a dire tale. The shocking story he relates ignites a terrible fury in the hearts of the Laguz. The assassination of the previous Benyon apostle sparked the massacre of the Heron clan, as well as the burning of their home, the Serenus Forest. That murder and the resulting catastrophes were long thought to be the work of Dain's former ruler, the Mad King Ashnard. Now, however, Prince Raphael, a survivor of the massacre, reveals that those directly responsible were none other than the senators of Benyon. Upon hearing this tale, the Hawk King Tibarn is consumed with an unspeakable rage. He shares this information with the Raven King Nisala and the Beast King Kanagus, and they form a Laguz alliance. Together with the Heron royal family, they send messengers to the leadership of Benyon, demanding an explanation from the senators. Benyon rebuffs their requests, however, denying any wrongdoing and refusing to investigate Raphael's claims, as if to emphasize their decision to silence the Laguz inquiries. The Empire goes so far as to murder an alliance messenger. This callous act of arrogant defiance pushes the alliance into declaring war upon the Benyon Empire. Gallia's sub-commander Ranulf considers the merits of attempting to simply overpower Benyon. He recognizes, however, that pitting brute force against Benyon's magic and tactical prowess will result in massive alliance casualties. He decides to enlist the strength and knowledge of his old wartime ally, Ike, and the Greil Mercenaries. Ike is an acquaintance of Benyon's apostle, however, and is at first reluctant to become involved in the conflict. Yet, when he considers the senator's cold-blooded murder of the alliance messenger, he can feel the anger that burns in the Laguz's hearts. Determined to force the senators to answer for their crimes, he agrees to help the Laguz alliance.
So yeah, 2 map screens in the same chapter. It's implied that there's a pretty big time skip between the start of that sequence and now. Because already, we're preparing for war. In fact, war has well and truly begun. And we're about to be meeting a new character here, one who's very, interesting. Before I go into this though, I just want to say something. So, all that stuff that just got revealed there, it does kind of feel like a retcon, since the previous game definitely seemed to be establishing that Ashnard was responsible for the assassination of the former Benyon apostle. Here's the thing though, Ike and the others never had any direct proof that he was. They kind of came to that conclusion on their own. And when you think about it, it really wouldn't make sense for Ashnard to have done that. He needed at least one Heron alive to sing for the medallion and release the Dark God. What good would it do him if the Herons were all dead? And really, there doesn't seem to be much benefit in it for him from assassinating the former apostle of Bednion. The senators, on the other hand, they could easily use that opportunity to seize power. So, it does make more sense the Senators being responsible, at least I find. Leanne wouldn't have known because she was asleep for pretty much the whole time, and Rayson, well, we don't really know what Rayson did around the time of the Serades massacre, but he is relatively young. Raphael, being the older brother, does seem like the one who'd most know the truth, and there are also reasons why he may have found out the truth on his own. I'm not sure if it's fully gone into later or not, but Raphael used to be a slave to one of the very high up senators. So he might have found out about it that way. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's deal with this. So our target is the city of Flagare. There are a lot of pretty elaborate names of some of the locations here. And meet Skrimir. Skrimir is what happens when you roll a D&D character and get an intelligence of 5. His whole gimmick is that he's pretty much a giant idiot. He has absolutely zero grasp of strategy or tactics. He just likes to bash things, otherwise known as he's basically Grog. And we'll find out exactly who Skrimir is in base conversations. But here's the Greil Mercenaries' role in this. I like how they actually are establishing that we are a guerrilla force and not the main army. One thing I like about Radiant Dawn is the way that it treats a large war. I'll explain more about this later, but it makes more sense for a smaller team of powerful characters like this to act as a guerrilla force than to be the entirety of the army. Also, this line is a little expanded on in the extended script. In the extended script, he doesn't just say to take out the ballistae, he mentions that you should capture the ballistae with your own archers and use them against the enemy. And when he says that, Ike says, don't worry, I have some very good archers in our employ. So that's basically Skrimir. Expect to see a lot of snarking at his expense, because Ranulf is one of the masters of snark in Tellius, along with Ike and Sauron. The three of them have some great moments together in Part 3. But we're friends, it's just what friends do for each other. Well, I mean, admittedly, that's kind of a bad example, because the majority of friends wouldn't go to war for each other, but this is a pretty extreme situation. Ike also is very familiar with how corrupt the Senate is from the last game, so he'll certainly take an opportunity to talk some sense into them the hard way. So with that, we have access to the base, and immediately I'm going to be going into items because we have a lot of characters, and people have been wondering how I would handle this part. I have to give bios for all 11 of these newcomers. So let's get right to it. Firstly, we have Ike. He got transfer bonuses to strength, skill, speed, and defense for me, and I believe HP as well. As you can see, his skill is already capped with transfers. To sum up the Greil Mercenaries, they are easily the best party in the game. All of them are insanely powerful, they have amazing base stats and pretty good growth rates to back them up. You can't really go wrong with any of them. So firstly, Ike.
I'm not much for politics. I live by my principles, my sword, and my friends.
The fabled father of Soth's children has finally arrived. In Path of Radiance, Ike was merely average until the very end of the game, at which point he became an amazing juggernaut of destruction. In Radiant Dawn, he's an amazing juggernaut of destruction from the beginning, and pretty much stays that way. In fact, Radiant Dawn Ike is often spoken alongside Sigurd as being one of the best lords in the entire series. Ike's base stats are very high all round, even without transfers. And while I normally don't take transfers into account in these bios, I will say that if you're doing transfers at all, chances are Ike has them to at least strength, skill, and speed. And that makes his start even better. In fact, he'll begin with capped skill. Speaking of capped, Ike's caps are extremely good in second tier. Despite speed not being the greatest of his stats anymore, it still has a great cap of 30, as high as Swordmaster's. His third tier caps are very good too. 37 in both strength and speed is pretty fantastic. Looking at Ike's growths though, he leans a lot more towards his Super Smash Bros. Interpretation, focusing more on strength than on speed. In fact, Ike's overall growth total is one of the lowest in this game, but his base stats are so insane that it doesn't really matter all that much. It's very easy to have Ike cap strength and skill and use bonus experience to fix his speed and eventually defense as well. Though there is one stat that bonus experience can't really fix, and it is Ike's one Achilles heel, resistance. His base is terrible, his growth is beyond terrible, and his caps are pretty terrible. Now, I normally maintain that mages suck in this game, including enemy mages, but Ike's resistance is so low that they're actually a pretty big threat to him. Keep Ike away from magic users, especially by endgame. Other than that though, Ike doesn't suffer from many of the weaknesses he did in Path of Radiance. This game is nowhere near as mount dominated, so his movement isn't as much of an issue. There are 1 to 2 range swords, so being sword locked until promotion isn't an issue, and even then, on promotion he does gain axes now. Which obviously includes hand axes. Not that he really needs them, because the whole 1 to 2 range problem, let's just say Ike gets Ragnall way earlier in this game than he did in Path of Radiance. And once he does, it's pretty much game over for the enemy. Being a main character, Ike has a plot-based promotion. He promotes to 3rd tier at the beginning of Part 4. Ike's 3rd tier promotion is a little unique for a few reasons. One, he's one of the few characters who can get an SS rank in 2 types of physical weapons. In this case, he can SS both swords and axes. The second way he is unique is skills. Most B-Orc classes gain their mastery skill on promotion to 3rd tier, and Ike is no exception, but he also gains Nile. These 2 skills combined pretty much ruin the chances of him using any other skills, but trust me, you want Nile on Ike. There's a very good reason he gets this skill on promotion. Speaking of skills though, Aether has had a pretty big downgrade. Well, not so much downgrade as it's exactly the same as it used to be, while every other mastery skill has got ridiculously broken. It still does 1 Sol hit and 1 Lunar hit, but neither of them have a damage multiplier. By contrast, both Sol and Lunar triple your attack power in this one. It's ironic seeing as Aether was easily the best mastery skill in Path of Radiance, it's now one of the worst. But really, does Ike need an overpowered mastery skill? No. No, he doesn't. He still 1-rounds basically everything once he gets Ragnall. To sum up, Ike is amazing in Radiant Dawn, and you should be using him a lot from now on. Oh, almost forgot, he also has Earth Affinity, so another reason he's amazing. And now Titania.
I'd like to ask you, how many years do you think I've been doing this?
Titania, a character with the rare honor of being amazing in both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. She doesn't start out in a higher tier class than anyone else in the Greil Mercenaries, but she does start at a very high level with insanely high base stats, so she might as well be a pre-promote. A pre-promote who doesn't gain any less experience from kills than anyone else in her party. Also, she's an Axe Paladin, and you know what they say about axes in Radiant Dawn. It really says something that Titania still manages to be amazing despite how badly Paladins got nerfed in this one. Her bases are pretty crazy, her growths are really solid in most areas, and she has access to the best weapon type in the game. And given her high starting level, plus the fact that you get a lot of bonus experience early in Part 3, it's very easy to 3rd tier Titania early even if you're not really trying. Really, Titania often hits 3rd tier for me even in playthroughs where I don't plan on using her. She does have one major weakness though, and it might not seem like one at first, but trust me, it is. Despite her base 20 defense, Titania is actually a bit of a glass cannon in this game. Her defense growth is awful, and even if you raise it with bonus experience, her caps are still pretty low in that regard. So despite the fact that she is, well, Titania, be careful when charging her into hordes of enemies. She's actually a lot more susceptible to dying than you'd probably think. Trust me, I may know that from experience. As long as you keep that in mind though, Titania is incredibly useful, and I often see her used in endgame despite the low caps on Paladins. Don't expect her to be killing endgame bosses anytime soon, but she's pretty useful for dealing with their flunkies thanks to her good movements. Oh, and Titania still has counter. It's actually improved slightly since Path of Radiance. It's now skill percent rather than skill over 2. And with Titania having less defense, well, relatively speaking in this game, she does make a lot more use out of it than she used to. It's still not the greatest skill, and it's still nowhere near how good it was in Awakening, but it's better than it used to be. And that's at least something. Sauron, who has transfers in my file to, I believe, magic, skill, speed, and resistance.
No matter who I may be, I have a duty.
Sauron is generally regarded as the best mage in this game. Not that matters much because this is a game where mages suck, but still, Sauron is the best one. If you're going to use a mage, you might as well use him. As you can tell by his growth, Sauron suffers from a similar curse that a lot of mages in this game do, having bad speed. In fact, his growth is similar to Micaiah now that I think about it, but unlike Micaiah, Sauron has a decent base speed. Though if you're on the higher difficulties, his starting speed is not enough to double even general sometimes. Sauron's speed caps are fairly decent for a mage though, so via bonus experience, it's not hard to make him reasonably fast, again by mage standards in this game. And Sauron benefits a lot from bonus experience because he tends to cap his stats very quickly, though this says more about how horrendous the caps on second tier mages are than it does about Sauron's own merits. By third tier, Sauron will be able to use all 3 types of magic decently well, though really wind is the only one you need, and staves. Extra staff utility is always helpful. But as you can tell by his third tier caps, Sauron is mainly good for hitting things really, really hard with magic. But he usually doubles more than Micaiah does. Sauron still has Adept, and thanks to Radiant Dawn's mechanics, he gets Adept free now, which is really good since Adept is one of the best skills in the game. He suffers a little bit from it being speed percent now. He'd prefer it being skill percent like it was in Path of Radiance, but his speed isn't that bad, as I said before. Sauron also has the second best affinity in the game next to Earth, and a bond support with Ike. Overall, I summed it up earlier, if you're going to be using a mage in this game, you might as well use him. He's usually your best option. And you can see here how bad the caps are on second tier mages. Mist, who actually does have transfers in my file, I believe just to magic and speed though.
I'll do my part. I just have to.
Mist is, very sadly, not as useful as she was in Path of Radiance. Maybe it's karma for her having a terrible voice. All joking aside, Mist isn't terrible by any means. She may not start out on a horse, but she does follow regular physical second tier movement rather than mage movement now, so she's a more mobile healer than the other one in the Greil Mercenaries. She also has a personal 1-2 range sword now, Florette. Unfortunately, it's physical, not magical. A lot of people have said that for the most part the loss of magical weapons wasn't that bad, but for people like Mist and Elincia it really was. Yeah, Mist wishes magical swords were still a thing in this one. Any other physical character would probably kill for something like Florette, but for Mist it's not really that great. It's Mist's third tier class that drags her down a bit. Not for the class itself, she still gains a horse, and this also makes her one of the few characters in this game to lose Shove and gain Canto on promotion. Which gets a little awkward sometimes because it means that she might be forced to drop a skill that she already has on promotion if her capacity is too full. But on promotion, Mist is essentially the same as she was in Path of Radiance on promotion, a mounted healer. That's all well and good, but there are 2 problems. The first is that Mist, for some arbitrary reason, has a unique promotion item in Radiant Dawn, and you don't get this until Part 4. This means that you can't promote Mist early to get the horse early until then. You either wait until level 20 or wait until Part 4. Either way, Mist is locked out of promotion for a while. The second problem is that Elincia exists. Even though Elincia's availability is not that great, for the time she is available, Elincia's class is essentially a far superior version of Mist's third tier class. Minus the weakness to crossbows. So at any time where you're forced to choose between Mist and Elincia, you'll probably choose Elincia. Mist is still a relatively decent healer for the early parts of Part 3, but I find that she's not quite as useful of a healer later in the game as she was in Path of Radiance. Rolf? From looking at his growth rate, you should already be able to tell that Rolf is kind of special in this game. Either he was really drinking his milk in the past 3 years, or he's starting to take after his older brother. Because Rolf's HP and strength growths are enormous in this one. He feels more like a fighter than an archer. In fact, remember back to when I said he also is tied for the highest B-Orc HP growth in the game, and you'll never guess who he's tied with. Rolf is the person he's tied with. Rolf does start kind of weak though, but not so weak that he has trouble getting started, like say Astrid or Fiona. And once he does start leveling up, his ridiculous strength growth kicks in and he begins to hit really, really hard. So let me just say it right now, Rolf is good, really, really good. Unfortunately, he happens to join at the exact same time as another sniper who's even better. Because of this, Rolf often gets overlooked in Radiant Dawn. But just because there's a ridiculously powerful archer already in his starting party doesn't make Rolf bad. Like I said, Rolf is indeed very good. And if you're not using that other sniper or you want 2 snipers, you really can't go wrong with Rolf. One slight advantage Rolf has over the other sniper is that he has a lot of bond supports, and because bond supports all boost critical in this game, that stacks really nicely with the innate critical bonus of snipers. Some people also like to give him Gamble as kind of a gimmick, but it lets him reach a 100 crit rate sometimes. I should also mention that the Three Brothers triangle attack is still in this game, and it doesn't need to be unlocked anymore. Though the game never tells you about it this time. But I'm going to cover that in another bio. Boyd. Boyd is back, and he's still pretty strong. Compared to Nolan, who we got much earlier, Boyd is a far more typical fighter, specialising in HP and strength, but just like in Path of Radiance, his skill and speed aren't bad at all. Unlike Path of Radiance though, Boyd in this game has a really solid defense growth, perhaps differentiate him from Nolan a bit. He also uses axes, and you know what they say about axes in this game. On the higher difficulties, I do find that Boyd has some problems killing things early on. His starting speed is not the best, and his starting strength is still not that great for a level 8 warrior. He often relies on criticals from his killer axe to kill things. Once he does get some level ups though, Boyd becomes an absolute monster, just like he was in the last game. Both Boyd and Nolan are amazing warriors, it's just that Nolan happens to be in a party that severely lacks good characters, whereas Boyd is just another Greil Mercenary. Which, you know, means that he's an overpowered character in a stack of other overpowered characters, you get what I mean. And just like his brothers, Boyd has some good bond support, so he can have a great crit rate in the right circumstances. Oscar. Oscar, the third of the Three Brothers, and another great character for the Greil Mercenaries. He's one of 2 cavalry characters they get, and Oscar might not be as brutally strong as Titania, but he's still very useful, despite the nerfs to cavalry in this game. Oscar is much more solidly showing his Able archetype roots here. He specialises heavily in skill and speed. Though as always, his other stats can be fixed with bonus experience once he's capped his good stats. Like the other brothers, Oscar has great bond support, so he can have a really solid crit rate. But speaking of supports, one thing in particular makes Oscar extremely powerful in Radiant Dawn, and that is having access to an Earth support. Setting up a support between Oscar and Ike can make the 2 of them into unhittable dodge tanks. And as a sneak preview, we'll also be getting a Daunt skill early in Part 3. A lot of people like to stack that with Provoke and give that combo to one of the Oscar-Ike pair. As another sneak preview, not to spoil much, but there's a point much later on where Ike is separated from the rest of the group by a barrier, and supports happen to still work through said barrier. Oscar's Earth support is also commonly used for this. So Oscar is not only a solid combat unit, he's also an amazing support partner. Now I got to Oscar, I can fully explain the Three Brothers triangle attack. For this to work, Oscar needs to be promoted because this will give him access to bows, but that's the only requirement. You do not need to view a special base conversation this time. Like the last game, the Three Brothers need to be 2 spaces away from the enemy, and the one initiating the attack needs to use a bow or a crossbow. It's still more of a gimmick than anything else, but as all 3 brothers are incredibly powerful in this game, you'll likely see more use out of it than you would have in Path of Radiance. Chinon. You probably already guessed this from Rolf's bio, but Chinon is ridiculous in this game. Which is probably karma from him having one of the few good voices in the Greil Mercenaries cutscene. Chinon's base stats are insane, and his growths are great too. Crossbows also give him a 1-2 range option, though admittedly not a very good one. And by endgame, let's just say snipers get an incredibly good SS rank weapon. 3rd tier snipers also have a unique ability in this one. They can shoot any bow from 3 range, but at a cost of -20 to accuracy. A cost that doesn't really matter given how insane their skill cap is, they usually hit anyway. Chinon still has his provoke skill from the last game, and Chinon is still much bulkier than your average archer, so he makes a lot of use of this. Especially since now he actually has 1 range options. There's really not much else I can say about Chinon apart from the fact that before Takumi came along, he was indisputably considered the best archer in the entire Fire Emblem series. Admittedly, the competition for that role isn't great, but still, he deserved it. Unfortunately, he is still a jerk. Gatry, who in my file has transfers to Strength, Skill, Defense, and HP, though funny thing about that, Gatry's base HP is 44. You're normally supposed to get +5 HP from transfer bonuses, but he only got 1 because his base HP was only 1 point off capped. Okay, bias alert. Radiant Dawn Gatry is my favourite armor knight in the entire Fire Emblem series. I used Gatry in my Path of Radiance playthrough specifically because I wanted to use him here. The main reason I like him so much is that he is a general with a 60% speed growth, which, by the way, is better than Meg's, so if she was supposed to fill the niche of speedy general, she kind of failed at that. His speed cap is still not that high, so he's not going to be doubling a lot, but I still find the idea of a general with a 60% speed growth while also having 60% strength and defense really cool. Gatry's base stats aren't all that amazing without transfers, but he should be able to cap strength, speed, and defense pretty quickly, and he only needs 1 point of HP to cap that. And that of course lets you bonus experience the rest of his stats up. His secondary weapon, being axes, is also very useful. It lets him use hand axes and, well, you know, just axes. And you know what they say about axes in this game. This time he has a bond support with Chinon too. Gatry still suffers from the usual weaknesses of generals, having lower movement and being relatively weak to magic, as well as I said, bad speed caps. But if you're like me and you have a bias towards generals, Gatry is very fun to use. And yeah, he already has cap strength, that is the power of transfers. Rice? Rice is no longer the only playable light magic user. But given that most of the light users we've seen so far have had major issues, how does he compare to them? Well, you can't really compare them because they're in separate parties for the majority of the game. But anyway, Rice is your fairly typical bishop. High magic, luck, and resistance, unfortunately, as per this game's mages, low skill and speed growths. And obviously very fragile. But by far the biggest weakness Rice has is his absolutely horrendous base speed. 14 base speed gets doubled by essentially everything at this point in the game. And given his bad defense, that's a really bad thing. You do not want Rice getting attacked by anything. And he has low movement, especially compared to Mist, so it's kind of hard for him to get into position to heal people. But he is a very effective healer, and he does hit very hard with light magic when you need him to fight. Overall, Rice isn't bad by any means, and he's a very useful healer. You'll just need to keep him far away from counterattacks until you can bonus experience his speed up a lot. Because I'll just reiterate, that base speed is really, really awful. As far as endgame potential goes, he suffers from the same problem Laura does. 3rd tier bishops have worse caps overall than Micaiah's 3rd tier class, and she's forced into endgame. So a lot like Heather, he falls into the he'll probably only be seen in endgame if you really like him club. And Mia, who is officially a Greil Mercenary now.
You know what, boss? I like you, so let's keep this good thing going.
Not only is Mia an official Greil Mercenary now, she's also improved drastically since the last game. I'd probably say Rolf has improved more overall, but Mia still had a really big jump. She is insane in Radiant Dawn. She has fairly solid base stats all round, and great growth rates. I can kind of describe her growth as a median between Edward and Zehawk. Her skill and speed aren't as high as Zehawk's, but her strength is a lot more than his, and she also has surprisingly decent defense for a Swordmaster. Also, being a female swordmaster gives her 5 points extra to her luck cap, at only a cost of 1 less strength cap. Her luck growth isn't the greatest, but if you raise it with bonus experience, Mia can dodge tank incredibly well. Even at base, her dodge tanking skills are great at this point in the game. Very little has more than a 30% hit rate against her. She still has Vantage, which, as I've said many times, got nerfed in this game. But thanks to her amazing speed, Mia at least likes the speed percent better than many others do. Like Boyd though, I have had a few personal issues with Mia on hard mode. Last time I played hard, I tried to use Mia, but her starting strength combined with the low might of swords was just not enough to deal damage to most enemies. She did 1 to 2 damage to the majority of things she fought, and I just wasn't able to get her the kills she needed to get stronger. I'm not sure if people often have this issue, but I personally found her a lot worse on hard than she is on normal. On normal or easy though, Mia's crazy. If you like Swordmasters, you'll probably enjoy using her. I just won't be because I am an admitted, extremely biased Edward fan. A bit of fandom history for you. Before people realised how good Zehawk was, most of the wars between Swordmaster fans happened between fans of Edward and fans of Mia on forums. And just to warn you, I have a slight bias against Mia as a relic of those times. So, with all that done, we now have some base conversations. We can access Manage. We don't have any bonus experience though. Every party has its own bonus experience pool. We can also swap around skills though, something that we couldn't do back in part 2. So if you want, you can give like Titania's counter to someone else, you can give Provoke to someone else. There's a few things that you can do here. I personally like to keep skills the way they are for now. You can access the support menu, but nobody can support each other. And I guess before we do info, because none of these info conversations are 3 stars, so I guess I can show inventory first. We don't have access to the shop yet. But one thing that I can show you is in the convoy, we have a whole bunch of coins. This is another benefit of data transfer. If you do a data transfer, every coin that you had in Path of Radiance appears in the Greil Mercenaries convoy at the start of Part 3. I'll show what coins do when we have access to the Forge, which we won't for a little while. Now, I might want to move around some healing items, because this game loves to give the best healing items to the people who don't need them, as I've said before. For example, Rice. Concoction is completely unnecessary on Rice, because if he gets attacked by anything, he's just going to die, so he's not going to have an opportunity to even use that. I'm going to go ahead and swap that Concoction to Ike, and I think there's a second Concoction here as well. And this is a Vulnerary. Yeah, Rolf doesn't particularly need that either. I mean, there's not that we'll really need a lot of healing items in general, because, not Mia, because we have some very good healers with us. But I'd rather Gatry have the Vulnerary, because he's more likely to be taking a bit of damage, and, Miss doesn't exactly need that, especially since her heal staff will restore her own HP. Boyd has bad defense, so I'm going to go ahead and swap that over to him. And that should be everything that I need to do for now. Oh, I also need to explain this. So, Etard. Funny story about Etard. This is a special sword that only Ike can wield, as its description says. In the Japanese version, this was called a Londite. Why is it called Etard in the English version? Well, you might remember that a Londite was the name of the Black Knight sword in the English version. In the Japanese version, the Black Knight sword was named, you guessed it, Etard. So they actually swapped the names, which is kind of funny. I actually like the way that worked out. So apparently the reason why they swapped the name from Etard to a Londite on the Black Knight sword is because in the game's data, it was always referred to as a Londite. So they just thought, let's make that more consistent. But then they needed a name for this because it was called a Londite in the Japanese version, so they're like, hey, we called Etard a Londite in the last game, let's call this game the Londite Etard. Let me guess, you've been dealing with Squimir. Anytime someone says it's nothing in an RPG, you should probably be worried. At least this isn't anywhere near as bad as how it gets in Tales of Symphonia, but anyway. Yeah, he was already conflicted about this earlier. Even Chinon? I'm very surprised. I'm sure Chinon's only doing this for the money. Yeah, I'm sure you will. And at this point, Ike is definitely not strong to take him on. I mean, we've seen how much the Black Knight stats have improved since the last game. Ike might be very powerful for this point, but he's still not quite up to the Black Knight's level. And more banter between these two. So, explaining this now, Skrymir is Kanagus' nephew, and he is set to become the next king. That is really bad. That's really, really bad. I'm remembering now that there are a lot of people in the comment sections of my Path of Radiance videos who wondered if, because you know how in Lagoo's society the strongest become king, it's not necessarily hereditary. People have wondered if a cat was ever king, seeing as they aren't naturally as strong as lions are. It would be kind of cool if, like, there was a cat king at some point in Gallia's history. Now I'm just thinking, I didn't expect a sort of Benyon Inquisition, and then Lekane suddenly bursts in yelling, "Nobody expects the Benyon Inquisition!" Ranulf is still troubled about something. Speaking of being troubled about things, here's Ike's conversation with Mist. This really harkens back to Mist's base conversation with Ike before Chapter 27 of Path of Radiance. Just a pretty standard moment between those two. Oh no, we're seeing Skrymir. This can't end well. Well, at least he respects Ike for his strength. Thing is, I feel like the kind of things Kanagus wanted Skrymir to learn are not related to strength. They're more related to tactics and being smart and not being idiots. Unfortunately, I think Skrymir may have missed the point. So, just a brief explanation here of why Skrymir wasn't playable in the last game. Kind of a shame that he wasn't, because it would have given us a, well, I mean, technically Skrymir's a royal, but, you know, a non-royal lion. I mean, technically Gifgar isn't a royal either, but he counted as one in Path of Radiance. And speaking of dinner from an earlier conversation, there's this. This base conversation actually showed me that Leth being defeated in Part 2 doesn't kill her, because I tried to do that just to show off something from later in, that happens later in Part 3 if Leth is dead, and she still showed up in this base conversation, so obviously she was still alive. You need to kill off Leth during Part 3 for that to happen. And yes, Oscar is a very good chef, which we find out in quite a funny way in his supports with Tanith in the previous game. Let's just say that she is not one. Well, I think Oscar did teach Mist a bit back in Path of Radiance. Ike still loves his meat. And this is also a great moment for Titania here. And there's also a great line here. No gameplay benefit out of that conversation, but it's a pretty nice one. So, I'm actually going to save here, because we don't have battle preparations in this chapter. So now is my last chance to save what I've done at the base, even though it's not really that much. Okay, hang on a second. One thing that I want to do before I move out, and that is I'm actually going to swap Rolf's bow for Chinon's killer bow. Rolf actually has a high enough starting bow rank in this game to use killer bows, and Rolf's bow, as you can see here, it's really not all that useful, seeing as Rolf can use steel bows at base without any speed penalty, and they're kind of stronger. I mean, what difference is 5 extra accuracy going to make? So I'm going to give him the killer bow. And let's move out. We have a very unique chapter as our first one in part 3, and oh, I forgot that this guy got introduced here. This guy is actually quite popular for a minor general for various lines of his. I'm gonna have to voice act one of his lines, so, because I'm obliged to, because it's one of the most infamous lines in this game, so I'm just gonna get ready for the voice that I want to do for him now. Oh, this is lunacy. Look how meager our force is, especially considering our proximity to Gallia. Yeah, that's how I see that guy talking. Never say that, because the moment that you do, that happens. Kind of a rare instance that our enemy's the ones getting ambushed here, so this is good for us. Yeah, Septimus's thing is that he's pretty much a giant coward, and he has some really hilarious lines later on. Also, this looks awesome. I love that. And it's time for our first operation as the Greil Mercenaries in 3 years. Let's go.